before we get into this episode, there's something that might be of interest that I wanted to tell you about. Scene and Heard, who run this podcast, have been asked by Scotland Food and Drink to undertake a strategic review of the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards. Now, these Excellence Awards have been going for almost 20 years and are a huge mainstay of the food and drink sector. But it's time to ensure that they're still relevant. So if you have ever been involved in the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards, or even if you've ever had an opinion about them, we would love for you, please, to complete our survey. So if you go to the On Farm Twitter, which is at @on_farm UK, and click the link in the bio, there will be a tab in there that will take you to the survey, and it should only take you a very short while to complete, but we would be enormously grateful. Hello and welcome to On Farm. It's Anna here with you this week. Back in March of 2023, I spoke with Domhnall Macsween and Will Evans, both of whom have received a relatively late in life, as in their 30s or 40s, diagnosis of ADHD. You said, Will, that when you first read a list of symptoms, you were kind of thinking, I tick every box here.
Yeah, it was quite funny, really, when you see the list. It was, oh yeah, that's me, that's me. So it was.
I'm going to interrupt you, Will, just because that's an ADHD. I'll interrupt people.
We talked about all of the different symptoms and experiences that they have gone through, both before, during, and post diagnosis. Recently, ADHD has been back in the news. Diagnoses have increased by, I think, 7 times in the last 10 years. So that's good news in that people have got more of an understanding of ADHD and how it can be managed. So bringing you this episode again, because it's hugely insightful and thoroughly, in my opinion, thoroughly worth listening to. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope you find it useful, and you never know, it might just strike a chord for you or somebody you know and ultimately lead to offering them some assistance. So that's what I hope. So thank you both for joining me. Will, your article for the Farmers Weekly suggested, and I'm totally in agreement, that this is something we should all be talking about more. And I wonder if you could perhaps just tell us a little bit about writing the article and what came before that.
Yeah, I think I've been on a bit of a learning journey, terrible word, journey, but I think I have over the last few months with this. I was very unaware of it. And then I was following a conversation on social media between two people who were talking about ADHD, and they were talking about some of their symptoms and what that meant for them. I just thought, well, all of those symptoms are me. So I messaged them and had a conversation with them about it, and then started looking into it. So I started off doing a few online tests and things like that, which all indicated that I was pretty severe with it. And then I got in touch with my GP and had a chat with them. They were actually really good. I've heard from a lot of people it can be quite difficult to get a diagnosis, but it was fairly straightforward for me. They referred me, spoke to someone about it, did sort of some tests, and they also agreed that I was severe. It's actually been a revelation, I guess. All these things that I've spent years beating myself up over and thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? Or why can't I do that in the right way? I suddenly realised why. In many ways, it's a big weight off my shoulders.
I'm sure it must be. And like with many things, you've been quite comfortable with sharing that journey. I think we're all grateful for that, because I think, it's perhaps something that not everybody is keen to talk about because it feels very personal and not everybody's keen to open up. Donald, do you share a similar diagnosis journey to Will, or is yours a bit different?
I think mine's a little bit more complicated. I think I've been aware of something for probably as I got into my mid to late 30s. I used to play a lot of football, but then I kind of semi-retired as into my 30s, and I didn't do the pre-season training. And I think as I got a little bit less fit, that symptoms started leaking out a little bit more. And I first went to my GP in 2018 when I would have been 34 then. I remember I went in and I said to him, I think I'm ADHD. And he went instantly, no, you're not. There's no way you are, because you've achieved too much. And I was like, okay, right, fine. Obviously, you know best. And he stuck me on antidepressants, which was rubbish, waste of time and everything. And probably then with lockdown, and I don't know if you're on TikTok much, but TikTok and Instagram right now, it's just everybody's ADHD. Maybe that's the way the algorithms work for me, but it's like, it feels like it's fashionable to be ADHD right now, and it's also equally fashionable to be like, oh, you're just making excuses for being lazy, or not working hard enough, or whatever. And I went back to my GP in the autumn last year. I think it was August, September, and I was told it was going to take probably 2 years to get a diagnosis locally. And the thing with ADHD is you are impulsive and impatient. So I did a little bit of research, and I went down the private route. And it did cost me £1,000, but I think that going private and investing that money, I think will be beneficial in the long run if I improve my productivity and actually finish all the projects that I start. So I'm probably a wee bit behind Will in that I was diagnosed 2 weeks ago and I haven't started my medication yet, and I'm just desperately keen to get going.
Wow, yeah. So this is still news that you're processing, I suppose. You say you had a feeling, you thought you knew yourself, but this is very new to you. Has it been a common thing whereby people have been to the GP and they've been put on antidepressants as the apparent solution to what's going on without being given a proper diagnosis?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I suppose we all appreciate the pressure that the NHS and GPs are under at the moment. So I guess that's probably a factor. I mean, I think it was perhaps easier for me because, I've talked about depression issues I've had before. I'm flying at the moment. I'm really good at the moment. But I mean, at the end of sort of last year, I was sort of having a bit of a dip, and I therefore keep in touch with my GP. And when I got in touch with him about it, first of all, of ADHD, I said, I think this might be a big contributor to reasons why I've had depression over the last few years. And they luckily could see where I was coming from. Yeah, just sort of, I find it very hard to take in information via conventional ways. So, this is a classic, but sort of sitting in this. And one of the reasons why I actually think it's probably very common in the farming community, because you hear this story all the time. School, I just spent the whole time staring out the window because I couldn't take in information, and I still struggle. But of course, as you get older, you learn to adapt, don't you? And I know I find a really classic one with me, and I just thought this was a quirky thing I did. I've now realised it's an ADHD thing, is that I leave notes all the time for future Will. So I know that I will struggle to retain information. So an example is how to use the GPS on our tractor. So in the autumn, I spend a lot of time in the autumn sowing crops using the GPS, and I know exactly how it works. I know that by spring I'll have completely forgotten how to use it. So I leave myself I have a little notebook that I carry everywhere with me, and where I draw little like childish flow charts, the kind of things you did in home economics in school, for recipes, with how to do this stuff. And I think I've spent sort of 40 odd years thinking that's because I'm a bit stupid. Well, now I know that it isn't. It's just a coping mechanism, and that's just fine. And I get by with that. But I'm sure there are lots of other people who have similar.
But what really struck me about that story, but also about, because you specifically mentioned it in your article, Farmers Weekly article, when we talk about symptoms, we're not talking. To me, the word symptom is a bit inappropriate, actually, because it implies that there's something wrong. They're not symptoms, really. They're characteristics, really. But what you talked about is the fact that not all of the symptoms are negative. There are positives here. And for me, writing a procedure of how to operate something in a notebook is a really positive thing, because, as you say, you're helping your future self, but you potentially could be helping other people who need that same procedure. So the symptoms, if let's just carry on using that word because it's easiest, I suppose, but they're not all negative. There are loads of positives in here about the way in which you interact with people as a result of the ADHD. You mentioned about, you've got a really high level of empathy for other people, and you think that is connected to the ADHD. Can you talk us maybe through that in a bit more detail?
Yeah, so that's another thing that I was sort of quite interested to find out, because I mean, it's that classic thing of being labelled at sort of bleeding heart or whatever, isn't it? But I mean, I remember as a kid, and there's been loads of things, but I remember when the Hillsborough disaster happened, so I was very young. I was so upset by it, like ridiculous. I mean, obviously everybody was upset about it, but I was ridiculously upset about it. You know, I was so affected by it, even as a small child. So much so my parents still talk about it, and I've always been like that. And I mean, I almost can't watch the news anymore because I just get so affected by sad stories. It can be great because, you know, like a lot of farmers, happy to help anybody, but it can also be a problem because you end up doing, you can't say no to anything, so you say yes to everybody, and it's to your own detriment because you end up so run ragged that your own things get neglected. In one way, it looks like a good thing, but if you don't manage it carefully, that can get you into trouble, as it has with me in the past. And it just realizing that is a classic ADHD thing is, again, just a big, oh, okay, that's really useful to know because now I can manage it.
But there'll be people listening though who'll go, oh, you know, you're just making a big deal out of nothing, and it's like everybody does that. But loads of people do that, but it's just so difficult to explain the extreme kind of. It's not just an emotional impact. It sometimes has it often for me it has a physical impact on me, like that kind of the empathetic element of it. It has a physical impact where I can't function.
And me as well, and it'll literally keep me awake at night. So you know, I don't sleep at the best of times, but which apparently again is a big ADHD thing. I don't know. I'd imagine there's an awful lot of people the same, but you know, those things will wake me up in the night, and then I don't sleep, and then you know that all the knock-on effects with that as well. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Domhnall, coming back to you, you know, this is so recent, your official diagnosis 2 weeks in, but when you understand and learn more about the various symptoms, how are you kind of attributing those to yourself and understanding those? Are there some that really stand out, or are you like Will and kind of you can understand kind of all of them as being relevant to yourself?
Yeah, I think I can see them all as being relevant to me. In different ways. I found it a massive relief because it's like, why can't I remember in school, so in Scotland we had standard grades and then we went on to Highers, and you know I breezed through my standard grades, didn't have to do any work at all, and then when it came to the Highers, when I actually had to study, I remember now just sitting in the room doing what I saw other people do on TV and stuff, setting everything out, and then just not being able to do anything, you know. And then I went to uni to do maths and physics. I was brilliant at in school. I found them really easy. And when I went to uni, I was like, oh, I can't be bothered. And I just lost my mojo, and I dropped out, and I was home for lambing. Then eventually I did do a degree locally. But my mum was in charge of the course and basically cracked the whip all the time. So that's what got me through my degree. I couldn't not just avoid doing the essays or whatever. So it was really, you know, I can look back and I remember I went self-employed in 2007. And I did a wee interview with a local paper, and I always remember a wee snippet of what I said was, I don't like doing the same thing 2 days in a row because I get bored really easily. Yeah. And you know, that was me. That was how I thought of it at the time. But now looking back, I was like, yeah, I did get bored really easily, and that was my ADHD. And every job that I did, I'd be there maximum 2 years. Because I was a broadcast journalist with the BBC for a while. I went all guns blazing. Oh, I love this. This is brilliant. 2 years down the line, I'm like, okay, done. I'm bored. I can't be bothered with this anymore. That's all the kind of negative things. There are positives, and I've always thought of myself as lazy. I think I've always thought of myself as lazy because I never had the energy or the impetus to complete things, but by being lazy, I was working smart, not hard. So I always find ingenious ways of making things easy, because I know that when I come back to completing a job later, I know I'm not going to want to do it. So I have to almost trick my brain into doing it, or or make it as easy as possible. And that's worked for me. And then from the TV side of things, Ramesh Ranganathan, the comedian, he did his, during lockdown, they had he's got his Misadventures program.
I know, I saw you on there. Yep.
So I was his guide and his kind of co-host for a week going around the Hebrides. But I always think that ADHD got me that gig because his producer came out like a month beforehand, and she came out of her car to come and visit me. And, I'm like 6'4" and she was about 5 foot. She came out and I just went, wow, you're really small. And, I just blurted it out. And I didn't know this at the time. But then, when we were doing the program, she said, this is what happened. And when you said that, that's when I thought, this is the guy for the gig. So it has opened doors and given me opportunities as well that I maybe would not have had necessarily otherwise.
Yeah. But I suppose, though, I wonder, and this applies to both of you equally, I guess, but Donald, had you been diagnosed at 9 rather than 39?
Oh, jeez.
What do you think would that have made any difference? You'd have had clarity, but what about the way in which you operate life and the way in which you run your business? Do you think that would be different?
I think I'd have more money in the bank. I think that's one thing, because it's just the impulsivity would have been. I haven't started the medication, but I think that's one thing that I have definitely felt a little bit frustrated in recent weeks, where I've been like, what if this had happened when I was 9 or 19 or even 29? I think it would have made a difference in regards to business. I think possibly I would have been employed by somebody, rather than go out on my own and be self-employed and do what I want when I want, because I need that freedom. I think, part of me thinks that I'm probably, at times it's very difficult for me to be employed by somebody. Not making a good sales pitch here just now, but I need to be my own boss. If somebody asks me to do a job today, I'm not necessarily going to be able to do it. Like 2 weeks ago, I had in my head that I wanted to go fencing, and I did nothing that week but fencing for the whole week, and I knew I have to finish this fence now, because if I don't finish it now, it'll be maybe in a year's time before I finish it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Will, what about you? I know you mentioned that there was frustration, that you wish you'd known this sooner. Do you think it would have altered the trajectory of your life if you'd known at 14 instead of 44?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would. I mean, I think it would have just given me a lot more self-confidence, if nothing else. I really did spend a long time, a bit like Donald just said. Really, I was almost. Wouldn't say I was afraid to leave the farm, but I wouldn't have had the self-belief to do so. So getting involved with wider industry things like I have over the last few years, which has, I guess, come almost a bit accidentally, but I regret not doing that sooner, because I told myself, I think for a long time, that this is all I can do. This is the only thing I can do. And now I realise I can do other things, and I can make a positive contribution. So maybe wouldn't have had the sort of mental health issues that I've had as well. Maybe that would have helped.
I learnt from having read your article. I didn't know at that point that self-esteem and anxiety were symptoms. I think that's not something that is kind of in the public domain particularly. Maybe it's because the definition of ADHD is lacking in a little bit of clarity, or that, well, certainly the acronym anyway. How might people be feeling, when we talk about self-esteem and anxiety, how might people be feeling if they're wondering that perhaps ADHD is something that they're likely to be diagnosed? Can you maybe share some of how you felt, Will, in that regard?
Yeah, I think, if you go back to anxiety, I suppose the important thing to say is with it, there's a long list of symptoms, and people with ADHD don't, I've got nearly all of them, and it sounds as if Donald does as well, but sometimes you might not have all of them. Again, I'm sort of speaking as if I'm an expert, but I'm still very early stages with this myself and learning. But there's some really good podcasts and blogs out there that you can find out about this. The anxiety thing is, I don't think that'll ever leave me. So I was going to a conference not long ago on the train, and I've done a lot of this kind of stuff over the last few years. Should be perfectly normal, but I was halfway there, and I just wanted to go home. On the train, I was just, I'm going to Scotland. I'm going to see loads of people. I'm going to be out of my comfort zone. All I want to do is go home and be on the farm. So I guess that I would imagine is probably quite a common thing, that sort of social anxiety aspect of it. I don't know whether Donald would agree, but it's just sort of learning, I suppose, that sort of stuff's okay. It's all right to feel like that. It's just giving yourself permission to know that that's all right. You're not weird or different or stupid for feeling like that. You're just part of it. It's just the way you're wired, and that's okay.
Yeah. Donald, that's definitely a question that I'd like to ask you, if that's okay, because I think to the outsider, people have seen you on television, they've heard Will's podcast in the past, the outsider thinks, God, these two guys, they've totally got it sewn up. They're confident, they know what they're talking about, they're running successful businesses. There's probably a lot of people out there who are envious of the pair of you because they think that, you've got confidence in abundance.
I mean, it comes in waves. I think a lot of people who've met me in person or know me in Lewis and Harris will think that I'm massively confident, bordering on arrogant at times, and that's fine. But I've often thought about that might be like a kind of defense mechanism as well, that I can appear confident and arrogant, so then people don't try and get to know me because I don't want them to get to know me, because it's just easier. And then probably a mix of all the things that you've just said and what Will said about the empathy earlier. I'm remembering now that time I did go into the doctor to discuss ADHD for the first time. It was a doctor I'd never met before, and I went in and he goes, "Oh, you're Sweeney, I've seen you on the telly, I love all your programs." I was like, why? No, I don't want this. You're making a big deal of it. And then I went like, I think I'm ADHD, and his face dropped. And I left that appointment feeling more sorry for him than I did for myself, because I could see how his face dropped, and he realised that he built me up and then just watched his own opinions crumble right in front of him.
It's interesting you say that though, Donald, actually, because I read about that the other day. And this was another sort of penny drop moment for me, because I was in a meeting not long ago, and there were 16 of us, sort of boardroom, and I was chairing the meeting. I think it was 4 hours. So we had a break in the middle, obviously, but it was a 4 hour
that sounds
meeting.
Painful.
It was. I mean, I love it, and they're brilliant team of people. I love them all, but I find that environment really difficult. And I read something that. As we talked about, what some of the positive impacts, or one of the positive things about ADHD is you can be very creative and creative thinking, and you can think differently. And basically it said that that's like the nightmare scenario for ADHD people. Really, you need to be walking around in a meeting and waving your arms about. And that's exactly me. That would work so much better for me. But of course, the challenge is you're probably going to annoy everybody else in the room because you're walking around like a clown waving your arms around. So I guess it's that sort of finding that balance.
The number of times that I've been told by directors on TV is stop waving your arms around, because I'm just going for it, getting animated, and I need to do that. Yeah, like I must have Italian blood in me because I talk through my hands so much.
No, but it was just one of those things that I hadn't even thought about, and then it was that's an ADHD thing as well, and so now I know that. But
the question I've got is, why do we sit down and not move about in meetings? Why aren't meetings more mobile? Would not everybody be better off having a bit of energy in their meetings and not being bored and switching off? And I don't know. Maybe we should start changing things, Will.
I mean, I've literally got a piece of paper next to me, and I'm doodling as I talk with my pencil, and I do this all the time. I obsessively draw little stars. I do this in meetings, so then people think I'm probably not listening, but I am listening. It's just that I have to put my energy somewhere.
The ability to switch off and relax, that's something that I cannot do at all. Like to sit down and do nothing. I used to be able to do it. When I used to go to the mainland, I used to like going to the cinema and watching a movie on my own. But I think things have got worse, like I was saying, into my 30s and that, and I don't think I can watch a movie now without doing at least one other thing. I'll be on my phone. I might be eating and on my phone and watching a movie at the same time. I need so much more stimulation. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I can't switch off.
I absolutely agree. And I mean, I suppose that goes back to to wondering whether there's an awful lot more people in the farming community than the wider community, maybe.
Yeah, and I definitely want to come on to that.
It's a classic farmer thing, isn't it? Not being able to relax and not being able to stop yourself working, and then all the associated problems that can bring. But I mean, I do wonder whether there's an element of smartphones and social media, whether they've all played havoc with our attention spans as well. But yeah, it's certainly find it very, very difficult to relax.
That was actually one of my questions, Will, whether you think that mobile phones, I think there's no doubt that they play havoc with everybody's attention span. But do you think mobile phones are actually just another hindrance and something that's just making things worse in terms of, being able to concentrate and finish a job that you've started without being distracted?
Yeah, I think so. So I even have this with my children. So four children, and even though our girls are pretty outdoorsy farm kind of kids, like all parents, you still have that challenge at the moment of trying to keep them off screens because it's all just so readily available, and it's finding a balance. At the same time, it is the year 2023, and you can't have them playing with a stick and a hoop all day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the temptation is there, but I think I would find something else to play with and fiddle with if it sounds really dodgy. I think I would find something else to distract me if it was a fact. There is always that kind of I wish I could just not refresh Twitter. Why am I refreshing Twitter? But I think I'd need something else, and I'd find something else to distract me.
Yeah.
Will, you mentioned in your article that you have a hunch that the prevalence of ADHD is stronger within the farming community than perhaps within other sectors of the UK or other workforces. Can you tell us a bit more about that hunch and perhaps anything that you've read that would support that? Because it seems to make sense.
Yeah, it started with a friend of mine, actually, Ben Taylor Davis, who I was talking to him about this a while ago, and we were actually talking about dyslexia. So I know a hell of a lot of farmers who are dyslexic. I mean, I suppose I know a lot of farmers, so you could argue that might be why. But it's not just sort of ADHD, it's dyslexia, autism. There just seems to be a very high prevalence of that in the farming community.
And I suppose much in the same way as you feel a relief, in a sense, from having a diagnosis, somebody somewhere undertaking some research to gain some clarity could provide a lot of wider relief, I suppose. We just don't know.
I think it's a lot more prevalent than people realise. Even in the past 2 weeks since I tweeted saying, 2 weeks today I tweeted saying, I got it. I've had so many people just messaging me saying, they think ADHD is badly behaved kids in school. There's the boy who's jumping around and disrupting everybody else. But I was always really well behaved in school. I was academically decent in school until I struggled to study. But people just think it's badly behaved teenage boys when there's so much more to it. And I did mention at the start, I manage my local football team, and the reason I mentioned it is that there's probably 3 or 4 players in the squad who I look at and I'm like, you're definitely ADHD. Even though I have no expertise in the place, I just recognise so many traits. And I've said to one in particular who I think I can see him on he's a little bit older, and I can see him on a similar trajectory to how I think I was in that into the 30s. Things are leaking out a little bit more. And I said to him, this is what I think is causing it. I'm just encouraging you to go and get help because I think it'll benefit you. With my other hats on and presenting Farbchen Chonchurach, the sheepdog trials programme on BBC Alba, and I'm always going around farmers throughout the UK and Ireland, and I've met loads of them, and so many of these individuals who are great characters, but they're so up and down, a bit like how I am and how it sounds like Will is as well. Really interesting characters, and I would put money on a lot of them being ADHD. There is that stigma as well as in, oh, you're ADHD. There's something wrong with you. You're a weirdo. You're a mentalist or something like that. These nobody wants to admit to these things. 2 weeks ago when I went to my neighbour up the road, and I went up to him and I told him that I was ADHD. He'd never heard of it before. And then I was like, when I I'm working on a project and then I never finish it. And then he interrupted me and he goes, so is this like the days I go in and your sheep are all over the place and I phone you and I go, how are my sheep out? And then he says, because you forgot to close the gate. And I was like, yes, that's it. That's exactly it. So he's like, okay, I understand it now. I understand the impact that it has and the number of times that I've just gone, or I've just driven out of a field on the quad and forgot to close the gate or something, or been like, I can't be bothered tying the gate today, it'll be fine. So I think it is out there a lot, and I think once you explain it to people, remove that stigma, make it a little bit easier, I think people will recognise a lot of the issues.
I certainly think that the two of you today have dispelled the myth that ADHD is about naughty teenage boys, which you've just alluded to, Donald. And I think the other thing, which maybe we'll just very briefly touch on before we wrap up, just to be as clear as we possibly can, just so that we can be ultra clear, Will. If there's somebody out there thinking that they recognise a lot of the symptoms that you've talked about, what would you advise would be the first step that they should take on their journey towards a potential diagnosis? Yeah,
there's some really good online tests for this, which I think aren't necessarily the you shouldn't rely on them the same as you probably shouldn't rely on anything online for a diagnosis, but they're quite a good early step. So there might be sort of 40 questions and then those kind of things that sum your response up. So I guess it gives you a bit of a guide, and then you can go on and speak to your GP from there. I know that there is a sort of a thing out there that it can be very hard to get a diagnosis, but as we've said, I guess the more people who do talk to the GP about this, the easier it becomes. One thing I would say, and just sort of following on from something that Donald said there, and I was sort of smiling because that makes a lot of sense to me, and it's been something that I think people around me have got very frustrated with over the years. And I'm a partnership with my mum and dad. I work with them and my wife as well on the farm. And I wanted to say to people who are sort of maybe grappling with this is that I've had nothing but a hugely positive response. And even from my parents, I spoke to them about it, and now suddenly they realise that's the way. So already my dad has kind of changed the way so sometimes if I've been away for a day or two, I walk in the yard and my dad sort of comes over and we need to do this, and we've got this, we need to do this, and this needs doing, and we've got to catch up with this, and blah, blah, blah. And he might as well be speaking Greek to me. It all goes over my head because he speaks so fast to me and nothing goes in. And he's got really frustrated with me over the years that he thinks I'm just not listening or I don't care. It's not that. It's just that I can't take it in. So he doesn't do that anymore. So, my dad's, a 70-year-old farmer. He's pretty set in his ways, but we've had a really positive response. And then the sort of Oxford Farming Conference team as well, as soon as I found it out, I told all them, we were having a Zoom meeting. I told them all and said, look, I don't want any frustrations to build up. This is this is the way I am. I'm not trying to get excuses in for sloppy work or anything like that, but just know that I communicate differently and I think a little bit differently. And again, I've had a really, really, really positive response. I think everyone was appreciative that I told them. So in my very sort of rambling way, what I'm trying to say is that people are not going to judge you badly or anything like this. People just want to help and support. And I think, if you're open about it, then people will help you.
One of the things with agriculture is record keeping and filling in forms. And that is one thing I struggle with an awful lot. And it's not like that I'm it's not out of any badness. It's I'm trying and I want to, and I can sit there all the time and think, I've got to update my sheep records, I hope I don't get an inspection, stuff like that happens all the time, and it's just sometimes I physically cannot do it. So while it's okay us talking about it, the system doesn't really accommodate anybody who doesn't conform. And like you're saying, well, we think there are so many people who are ADHD in the agricultural sector. The form filling and the admin stuff in my crofting life is more than anything else that I do. So it's a real struggle. And like I said before, I'm a counsellor as well, and that involves lots of paperwork and reading papers and things like that. And I'm trying to think of a way. I would love for there to be software that would just put it all into audio format. And then when I'm out working on the Croft, I can listen to it all. Listen to it. It goes in. It doesn't necessarily stick there, because like one of the things with ADHD, you can be reading a bit of paper and I can read every single word on a page, but it doesn't mean I'm going to absorb all these things. So I think that's the thing, that the system, I would love for the system to be able to accommodate this kind of issue a wee bit more. That would be useful. If you think that there's something different about you, go find out about it. I saw a video on social media, and it was, you know, they call people with ADHD neurodivergent, and they were saying people who aren't neurodivergent don't go looking for this information. You know, it's not something that's on their radar. If you are neurodivergent, then you're like, why am I different? Why am I looking for something? So if you've got questions about yourself, go get answers. Don't just sit and wait. Do it now, because okay, we said, what would my life have been like if it had been done at 9 instead of 39? Well, at least it's 39 and not 69.
Spot on. Thank you so much, both of you, for your openness, your honesty. The level of detail that you've given us as well has been really great, sharing examples, because it's all helping to give people a greater understanding. So thank you both very much for taking part. We'll share this as widely as we can and make it our mission to ensure that more people have got a true understanding of what ADHD means. Hopefully we'll have you both back on the podcast again in the future.
Thanks, Hannah. Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
So thank you once again to Donald and to Will for their openness and honesty there. And thank you also to Bell Ingram, our new sponsors of the podcast. That's it from me, and I shall sign off, and we'll be back again next week.